again, good afternoon to everyone. We've had quite a few people join since I spoke a few minutes ago. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to my guests from the Al Ghurair Foundation and to their scholars. I'm absolutely delighted to be joining you all today to give this presentation. Just before we make a start, I would like to let you know that this seminar is being recorded, so it can be placed on the Al Ghurair Foundation platform, so it can be viewed by other people. So if you do not wish to be recorded, then please keep your video and your microphone off. So once again, I'd like to introduce myself.
Well, right now, I'm actually still at home, and I'm talking to a friend of mine. We had actually moved out
Could I please,
together.
excuse me, could I please ask everybody to mute themselves? Please, could you keep yourself on mute whilst that I'm talking, please? Thank you. So once again, I'm Cheryl Thornton. I'm the Director of People Services at Russell Kamer Academy. We are an education institution, and we have from primary school all the way through to high school. We offer the British curriculum and we also offer the International Baccalaureate curriculum as well. Thank you to Maya and to the Al Ghurair Foundation for inviting me to be here today. So let's get straight into the presentation. And what I suggest is if you have any questions, to please type them in the chat. I have my colleague with me, Rana Sala, who is my Marketing and Communications Manager. Rana, do you want to maybe pop your camera on so you can just say a quick hello to everybody? So Rana will be taking note of the questions in the chat, and then we'll have some pauses in between the presentation to take some questions, and again at the end. Thanks, Rana. Thank you. So Rana will be helping me to moderate the call. Okay, so we will now go into the presentation. Rana, if I could just check you can see the presentation. Yep. Okay, so today my topic is on career trends, skill gaps and directions for the future. Now, in this seminar, I will be addressing current changes that are happening in the workplace, and I'm sure we can all agree that a lot has happened, particularly in the last 12 months with the impact of COVID. But let's also have a look at the normal changes that were happening and well underway before COVID as well. We'll also look at the future workforce skills that are not only needed nowadays, but how it will trend and evolve for the future. I'd like to touch on a piece of research that was done by PricewaterhouseCoopers about 3 years ago, where they talked about the 4 worlds of work by around the year 2030, and perhaps 4 possible scenarios that await us in about less than 10 years, and how we can maybe respond to these changing forces, particularly with the mega changes. And what we're really seeing with mega changes and mega trends, obviously technology is a big one, urbanisation of many countries and particularly developing countries, climate change, and so forth. Okay, and then we'll round off the seminar by talking about agile organisations. So I think it's really interesting, and I think it's no secret here that we're seeing a lot of change happening, and we'll come to COVID towards the end of the seminar. But let's just talk about some of those changes, those mega forces or trends that were impacting on the workforce. I think what we're seeing is a shift in drive or motivation. More people are interested in that work-life balance, and that work-life balance is even changing even more so than before. So things like flexible working, remote working, which has certainly been accelerated over the last 12 months, are becoming the norm and will continue to become the norm into the future. What is really interesting is that we're now starting to see the emergence of 6 generations in the workforce. So we could see all the way from the baby boomers who are almost on the way out into retirement, but still a few left in many workforces, all the way through to millennials and even the next generation coming through. So it's interesting times, particularly for organisations and for their HR departments. We're seeing that employer brand and the loyalty to the employer brand is increasing even more. So what we're seeing is that war for talent that's been talked about over the past 5 years is not about a war for talent per se anymore. It's going to probably be about a war for the right skills. So that's going to be quite interesting. And what are those right skills, expertise, and life experience that go with it? More and more, we're seeing the increasing shift that machines will definitely take over a lot more, particularly of transactional or manual work, and obviously AI as well. So, where does that leave us humans? And obviously, we'll talk about those value add activities. People insights, so what we think, what we feel, conclusions that we draw from information, assumptions, and so forth, will become equally, if not more important, than actual scientific data. So, customer, marketing, and financial information will still be key, but people insights will also be very important. I think what we're seeing, and just to coin a phrase, is that Facebookization of work. In other words, the social media platforms. So it's not just digital at home anymore, but we're seeing increasingly it's digital at work as well. So this leads to more social learning. So things like networking, collaboration through social platforms, and learning how to jam is not going to be an if, but probably will become a must in the future. And then how does this all impact on human productivity? Let's have a look at what's going on. Okay, so first up, we have technological breakthroughs. So what's happening here? We're seeing rapid advances in technological innovation. Automation, robotics, and AI are advancing quickly. It's dramatic change in the nature and number of jobs that are being taken over by technology. Technology certainly has the ability to improve our lives, raising productivity, living standards, the average lifespan, and it frees people up to focus more on that work-life balance, so more on the personal rather than the work, so personal fulfillment and attainment. Technology, though, also brings a level of threat to social unrest, a threat to jobs, and roles evolving and what technology will take over. It also can have a political upheaval, and there are economic advantages, but also disadvantages if technology is not shared equitably. If we have a look at the demographic shifts, I've already touched upon, the six or five even generations in a workforce. I think what we're going to see is a changing size, distribution, and age population or profile of workforces, not just the world's population. So I think what we're going to see is longer lifespans, retirement ages increasing, business models adapting to having multi-generational workforces, um, organisations, particularly HR departments, managing pension funds on one hand, and then managing at the other end talent ambitions. We're going to see older workers being in the workforce a lot longer, having to learn new skills, particularly around technology, and having to work a lot longer too, with pension ages increasing in many developed countries. We're going to see what we call retooling is going to become the norm. And we're going to see that there will be at some point a shortage in actually humans being in the workforce, particularly as we see the baby boomers and also Generation X heading into retirement. Okay, so obviously automation, AI, technology will play a key role in that. With rapid urbanisation, the UN predicts, the United Nations predicts that by 2030, 4.9 billion people globally will be urban dwellers, and that by 2050, the world's urban population would have increased by 72%. Okay, so many of the largest cities will have a GDP that is larger than mid-sized countries. So in this future new world, we will see cities will become particularly important agents for job creation and particularly for millennials. As we move along, we're going to see a shift in global economic power. There'll be a lot of power movement or power shifts between developed, as we see developed countries now, and developing countries that are emerging. So we're going to see that rapidly developing nations, and particularly those with a large working age population, will embrace more of a business culture or ethos and will start to attract more global investment and improvement in their education system. So what does this mean for the developed countries? So we'll see the emerging nations will definitely face the biggest challenge around technology, and will start to bridge the gap, particularly around unemployment. And what we're going to be seeing is that investment, particularly into the emerging countries, will increase substantially. We're also going to see, most likely, the erosion of a middle class. We're going to see wealth disparity and job losses that will be impacted on due to large scale automation. And this in turn has potential to increase the risk of social unrest, particularly in developed countries, as emerging and developing countries start to forge through in the next decade. And finally, we're going to be seeing resource scarcity and a lot of climate change. So the demand for energy and water is forecasted by the United Nations to increase by as much as 50% and 40% by the year 2030. There's going to be new types of jobs created, particularly in industries such as alternative energy, new engineering processes, product design, and waste management. And companies and workforces will need to evolve to these needs. We'll see a big shift towards emerging countries, particularly in these areas of industry. So depleted fossil fuels, extreme weather conditions, things like pandemics, rising sea levels, and water shortages will all have an impact on the future of work. Let's have a look at the workforce skills. Okay, so what we're seeing over the next 10 to 15 years is that the adoption of automation, AI, and robotics will transform the workplace. People will increasingly interact with even smarter machines and technologies, and that the human machine interaction will bring a lot of advantages or benefits, particularly to society and the workforce. Analysts are predicting that there'll be a higher economic growth, improved corporate performance, and new prosperity. Automation will assist in improving and replacing the aging workforce at a time when the working age population in many countries will see a lot of the workforce start to retire. It will, however, bring some societal issues and challenges as well. Okay, so where does the line end between machine or technology and human intervention? How much will there be of overlap, and how much will be very clearly separated between the two? So the demand for workforce skills will definitely be changing. However, there is still much analysis around how that will change and how much that will change. What we do know is that the social enterprise will start to increase. The generations in the workforce will also change rapidly and quite dramatically. And over the next 5 to 10 years, millennials will actually be the majority in the workforce. So here's just a quick look. I'm not going to go through every box, but what we can see, and we're just talking about some of the key generations as we know them that are currently existing in the workforce. We've got the generation that was born pre-World War II. Most of them are retired now. Some might be still owners of organisations, small, medium or large enterprise. Many have been in retirement for several years and some have moved on. We've got the baby boomers. Some of them have retired. They were born just after World War II. Most of them are heading into retirement or have retired, but we still have several of them left globally in a number of organisations. Often they're at a senior level and they've been perhaps with their organisation for several years. They're now heading into retirement, and we're going to see a huge shift in knowledge, leadership, information, and other resources leaving with them. So there's a knowledge management component around that on how to capture that. And many organizations are scrambling now to actually make sure that they don't lose the knowledge that the baby boomers held. We see Generation X, born late 60s through to around the early 80s, very much a generation that's still in the workforce. Their priorities have shifted. This generation has children still of school age or moving into university. So there's a balance of managing, education for children, but also planning for retirement as well. Often this generation sits around middle to senior and executive management, and they may also include technical experts. We then have the millennials, born during a time where technology is not new to them, applications and other devices and use of social media is very much a big part of this generation. It's a generation that feels comfortable with technologies, rapid changes, and evolving workforces, and also adjusting to different work environments and so forth. So the generations have different perspectives on issues around things like work, work ethic, leadership, authority, relationships, perspectives, and perhaps what will perhaps turn them off, in a workplace or in respect to their jobs. So what are some of the things that an organisation can do to actually manage these different generations? And what we're seeing more of is that companies are having more conversations, conversations with individuals, conversations with different generations, rather than looking at a workforce holistically and one size fits all. It's now about conversations with the different demographics that exist within the workforces. And how do you manage that talent and that diversity within your workforce? It's about understanding the diversity and the different needs and the different preferences that are associated with them. And it's also very much about having options or choices for the different generations. So again, rather than taking that one size fits all approach. It's really interesting that pre-COVID, Gallup surveys did a survey back in 2016. And what they looked at was these different generations. And in their survey, they identified that at the time, only around 30% of millennials were actually engaged, which means emotionally and behaviorally, and were connected to their job or company. So this is obviously telling us with the emergence of the millennials in the workforce, particularly in the next 5 to 10 years, engagement is going to mean a different for each organisation on how it's traditionally been managed, and they're going to have to manage engagement in different ways and looking at those preferences. Once again, and no surprises here, millennials, around 80 to 90%, are the biggest users of the internet, the biggest users of social media platforms, as opposed to maybe the baby boomers or the Generation X, can be a little bit more traditional, like watching television, listening to the radio, reading magazines, and print media. So we're going to see quite a shift in how engagement and obviously connecting, particularly with millennials, will happen over the next few years. So as we move along, let's have a look at now the ecosystem. Let's have a look at where we've come from and what does this mean. So we can see on the vertical axis, it's about an external focus. The ecosystem here looks outwards and it looks inwards. Inwards is within the organisation, obviously, and external is having a wider focus across not only a community, but an ecosystem. Okay. On the horizontal axis is our degree of collaboration and agility, agile organizations and the ability to flex and respond to changes rapidly. Do we, sit at the functional end, or do we sit at what we call the symphonic end, which is more about the networking of teams and collaboration? So, organizations will obviously sit in different boxes here. What is the belief is that organizations will head towards more a social enterprise where they will sit in a very high level of an external focus, an outward focus. The workforce will change to look at more, the transient workforce, the mobile workforce. People won't necessarily be employees of companies. There'll be more a freelance workforce or a consulting workforce. You come in, you do a project, you work on a particular task, so skills are hired rather than looking at a role. Or you may do a short-term assignment for 1 year, maybe up to 2 years. So mobility is going to be key here. What we're seeing in terms of collaboration and agility is that companies need to be able to move quickly, need to make decisions quickly, need to adapt quickly, and in order to do that, they might need to constantly change their workforce, refresh their workforce. So again, going back to rather than having a fixed employee headcount, that's going to become a lot more dynamic. And as I mentioned, there's going to be a lot more for mobile workforce, where the workforce will become working from anywhere at any time, anywhere in the world remotely. It's going to be more about mobility and more about opportunities. So when we have a look at global human capital trends that were done by Deloitte in some of their research that they did in their survey back in 2018, what Deloitte is really noticing is there's going to be a strong shift, particularly in the next few years, towards a network of teams, and that companies are going to embrace a business model that enables greater collaboration and internal agility. Okay. We're going to see a shift in the workforce from more internal employees to more external and more consulting or the mobile workforce. Okay, so the demands of stakeholders are going to shift. There's going to be different needs and requirements. So organizations not only need to rethink their business model, but also need to rethink their people model in terms of jobs. So just here, it kind of sums it up and where we're heading into the future. You know, we're probably looking at being more in the emerging phase, and that's definitely been accelerated over the last 12 months with COVID. Organisations have had to adapt quickly, introduce technologies perhaps that didn't exist in their organisations in order to respond to COVID, or to adapt the existing systems to respond to COVID. So what we've seen is we've come out of a period around 10, 15 years ago where technology assisted us and the human element was still very much the main focus. We're now coming into that augmented intelligence where we're trying to strike that balance. You know, we're seeing more and more technology in the workplace with our workforces. Roles are changing, duties, responsibilities are changing, roles and job descriptions are evolving and are being adjusted as well. Where are we heading? And it's going to happen fairly quickly, is the autonomous intelligence. So, you know, the conversation around sitting next to a robot is happening now as we speak, and it will increase phenomenally in the next few years. In the next 10 years, having a robot and a human sit side by side will not be new, it will be the norm. The future of humans in the workplace will change dramatically, and what does that future look like? So there's still question marks around that, and hence there might be some resilience or resistance, I should say, that you might find that there's perhaps insecurities around this, and these questions need to be answered by organisations and particularly with their workforces. So if we just have a look here, we're really seeing this rapid shift in direction. Now, traditionally, and particularly with the Generation X and before that, it was very much about my paycheck, my job satisfaction. I had a good boss. I had a good relationship with my boss, my performance review, my development plan, looking at my strengths, my weaknesses, what entailed in my job was the opportunities for promotion, training and development, promotions, global mobility, and so forth. They still exist because we have to remember that we do have that multi-generational workforce, but they're also changing, particularly with the introduction of millennials into the workforce in the past 5 years. So that's now shifting to more about individual and organisation purpose. It's more around development. How do I get developed? How do I acquire and multi-skill and upskill? How do I acquire future skills? So it's not just for the now, but also for the future. Who is my coach? Do I have a mentor? And it doesn't necessarily mean it will be your boss. Where are the conversations that I'm having? Who am I having those conversations with internally and externally? What is my ecosystem, both at an individual level and at an organizational level? Looking more on what are my strengths and what are my life goals. And work and life become more intertwined and the goals become more intertwined. So this is what we're really seeing. So with millennials, what we're going to see is my work must have meaning, a pursuance of development. What it's going to be looking at is more around how do we drive my career and what is going to drive my career. Millennials don't want that boss approach. What they're wanting is someone who guides, facilitates, enables, and helps them to build those strengths and guides them with their life and personal goals. So as we see here, this kind of really sums it up. And workforces and organisations are actually going through this shift as we speak. We need to look at things like, on the left-hand side, in the orange text, these are what we call the structural design changes to cope with the shift. Okay, so the shift in what are the skills needed. They include things like a mindset or a cultural shift, how the organisation is set up in terms of its organisational structure. We're going to see less hierarchy or traditional structures and more circular and all team networks. There's going to be the new type of collar jobs. So no longer the white collar workers or the blue collar workers or manual workers. We're going to see an emergence of the new type of collar jobs. The workforce composition, with the booming gig economy, we're going to see an increase, as I mentioned, in a lot more freelancers, independents, independent consultants and contractors. And there's going to be a shift away from the C-suite and also the HR. Okay, so the traditional leadership team as we know it with a CEO and a board is actually going to have to adapt in order to lead and orchestrate the changes that are needed. To the right, what we're seeing here is different options that companies can look at in order to build their future workforce. And if companies are doing it well, they're probably going to be engaging all 5 of these opportunities. So with their existing workforce, they're certainly going to be retraining, upskilling, redeploying people within their workforce. So that leads us to the next point. So the workforce will shift, redefining of jobs, job roles, the process, the workflow, tasks, and so forth. And then people will be then retrained and redeployed. There'll be hiring, perhaps, hiring of talent or skills or teams in order to complement the existing workforce. There'll be that contract type employment, so short term, fixed term, come in, do a specific piece of work, and then leave. And then there might be a removing of certain skills and therefore individuals in the workplace that are no longer required. It may be done through involuntary decisions or through normal attrition such as retirement or resignations and so forth. So we've covered quite a bit of information to this point. I'm just going to take a little pause. I'm going to go to my colleague Rana. And Rana, do we have any questions at all in the chat, Rana, of anything that may have come up? Do you want to pop on your camera, Rana? So we will take a moment just to have some questions. So if you'd like to type in the chat, feel free. Or if you'd like to unmute your microphone and speak, just keep in mind that we are recording here. You are most welcome to unmute your microphone and ask any questions on any information that has been covered so far, or perhaps anything that you would like to offer, perhaps maybe a comment or some feedback. It seems that everybody's quite good, so we'll continue on with the presentation and we'll still have opportunity for further Q&A later. All right. So, oh, this diagram looks really interesting. What it's really saying, if we have a look at the 5 labels at the top, physical and manual, basic cognitive ability, higher cognitive ability, social and emotional intelligence, and technological capability. What we're going to see is that particularly around physical and manual, basic cognitive, and higher cognitive, that is going to decrease in the amount of energy or input into those areas by the year 2030. So what we're going to see is a definite increase rapidly around social and emotional skills are going to be really important, and particularly technology skills. So how do we prepare the current workforce plus the future workforce of talent that will be coming through and make them ready for the future of work? So this will feed into recruitment. It will feed into the way that we hire people. Where do we hire them from? How do we source them? What do we offer them? Because it won't just be about salary. What are the other benefits? The non-financial benefits, but also the intrinsic motivators, particularly around career, opportunity for growth, coaching, interesting conversations. So that will need to be looked at. So there's going to be, particularly by recruitment, they're going to be looking at non-traditional sources and other ways to hire, particularly for the future workforce. A lot of it will be done through networks, collaborations, and so forth. Now, what we're going to see also is that we're going to see a skills shift by industry. So let us take 5 key industries as we know them. We've got banking and insurance. We've got the energy and mining. So that will also include oil and gas. We've got the healthcare industry. We've got manufacturing and then also retail. Now, down the left-hand side, what we can see are those skills that we looked at in the previous slide. And what this is really telling us is that, particularly as I mentioned around those first 3 areas, physical, basic, and higher cognitive skills, that's going to decrease or become not required by the year 2030. Okay, so what we're going to see is a positive rise and demand for those social and the emotional skills. So if we just have a look, let's take, for example, banking and the insurance. So we're probably going to see roles like data entry, roles like debt collectors becoming non-existent. And what we're going to see is going to be a rapid shift in a demand in banking and finance and insurance for software developers, for customer service representatives, for computer systems analysts, for financial analysts. So quite a shift more towards the technology, whether that be development or whether that be analytical skills. Okay. If we jump to, say, healthcare, we're going to see less around the more transactional, particularly again around things like telephone operators. So for example, your receptionists in the hotel, in the hospital. We're going to see less around laboratory technicians. And what we're going to see is actually quite a shift more towards the people element. Okay, so that's really interesting. So most industries are actually declining in the human touch or having humans in the workforce. Yet for the healthcare industry is actually going the other way. And the demand, particularly for healthcare workers, and not necessarily doctors, but the demand for those home healthcare workers is going to increase rapidly, for personal care aides, for home health aides, and so forth. Again, what we're going to see though in the healthcare industry is the emergence of those software and technology developers. So that's going to be a key occupation. There's going to be a lot more around well-being and a lot more around mental and social welfare of people. So the healthcare industry is going to evolve quite rapidly, but they're actually going to increase more so in their human element while still utilizing technology. If we just have a quick look maybe at retail, I think there's no secrets here. And I think COVID has certainly accelerated the shift towards e-commerce, online purchasing. If retailers were not already using technology, they're certainly using it now. And we're even seeing those small and medium retailers as well have had to adapt their business models. I was at a judging competition last week, and one of the presentations was around, you know, the small operators in India who sell school items, things like pens, stationery, and so forth. And they were actually assisted by an organisation who helped them not to go broke during COVID, particularly during the lockdown, by helping them with technology and able to put their products online. So retail definitely is shifting in a different direction. We've started to see a lot of that technology happening already with your big retailers. H&M, Zara, Amazon, of course, led the way many years ago, Alibaba, but even they are evolving their business models. So e-commerce and the demand for people with e-commerce skills is certainly going to increase. So before we just touch upon the four worlds of work in 2030 and the research done by PwC, it's really important to highlight with those changing patterns of skills requirement, those social and emotional skills are going to be in demand across all sectors. So the heightened sense of human emotions, awareness, EQ is going to increase rapidly. So it's not just about cognitive and technology or technical skills, it's very much and even more so going to be around those social and EQ type skills. So PwC produced a wonderful white paper report back in 2018. It is available now to the public, and I would encourage you, if you would like to read it in detail, to do so. It's a really interesting report, and it took quite an interesting view on the world of work. Now, 2030 is less than a decade away. You know, a few years back, 10 or 15 years, 2030 seemed a long, long way away. It's not. It's around the corner. And we can actually start to see some of these four worlds that PwC are talking about have been emerging over the past 5 to 10 years and will continue to merge even more strongly in the next 5 to 10 years. So what PwC came up with was four different worlds, and where organisations are probably going to pick one of these worlds, or perhaps take a hybrid between a couple of the worlds and build their business models. So they were saying that you could pretty much then put organizations into one of the quadrants, or perhaps they would have that hybrid model. So if we have a look at the yellow world first, this is very much about a social organization. It's about social impact, it's about community. The way financial is done is through crowdfunding, and it's putting the social element at the heart of the organization. Okay, so the humanity or the human element is going to be really highly valued. So if we look around purpose in this type of organization, it's going to be very much an organization around fairness, equity, and social good. So rather than developed countries being here and less developed countries, poverty countries, or emerging countries, rather than having such a disparity, it's about bridging that gap, and how do we do that? And we're already seeing, the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffetts of the world, looking at that social equity globally. It's very much about focusing on the environment. We're in this together. We need to protect the world. We need to protect our natural assets and resources. Okay, the future workers are going to be very much around training. It's going to be around what opportunities I have for career and growth and alignment of my personal values with an organization. Okay. So the orientation of this type of organization and its workers is going to be around loyalty to the people and to its workers as opposed to the organization. So this is this yellow world that PwC has envisaged. If we move across to the red world, this is about innovation. Okay, so this is very much about focusing on consumers or the needs of your clients. It's where innovation is put first as opposed to industry regulation. It's about being a pioneer. It's about being ahead of the curve. It's about very much about technical experts. The focus is around profit. Okay, so with this type of red world, what's going to be the focus? So people engagement is very much going to be high, but not necessarily engagement around those more social elements, more around what do your workers want. Okay, so how they work, what they want to work, how it's going to support them. It's very much about going to be around competition. Okay, so the theme is about how do we remain competitive and how do we do that through our people. We also see that the focus still is around the environment, but it's also about having agility and it's about having speed and using the environment to the benefit of the organization, not just the community. The future workers are going to be about individuals. So this is about not necessarily having loyalty to anyone. It's more about the level of quality of work. When do we need that quality or those skills from individuals? And when do we obviously end the relationship between the organisation and those individuals? So it's going to be a very fast-paced environment, very much focused on innovation, having the best products, remaining competitive, and having the right people at the right time with the right skill set. We then have our green world, which is very much about a powerful social conscience, similar to the yellow world, but at heightened levels. So this is very much with a purpose around, as an organization, we care. We care about our people. We care about the community. We care about the ecosystems in which we operate. We care about the environment and our natural resources. Okay, so red and yellow are doing all of that, but this is a real focus for an organization in the green world. Okay, so social responsibility, social impact initiatives will actually dominate the corporate scorecard. Okay, the agenda, the strategic objectives and plans will center around this. It will be about sustainability. It'll be around looking at the changing way of the world in terms of whether that be climate change, economies, political, demographic changes, so on and so forth. Okay, this type of organization, they're driving a high degree of loyalty from their workforce, even if it is a mobile workforce. And then finally, that brings us to the blue world. This is the real corporate organization. They are going to evolve. They are going to be doing many of these things that I've mentioned, but they're going to be doing it in a different way. Okay, so global corporations will take center stage. For them, it's about the corporate organization. It's about putting careers with the organization. So it's bringing in people that have careers for a certain period. There's a lot of pressure to perform. So there's high demands for their people. So this is looking at top achievers, high performers in the workplace, and then getting those real cutting edge, leading edge skills. Okay. The downside of this type of company is a burnout. Okay, so these types of top performers or individuals will probably come in for a short period, short to medium, and then they will move on. Companies will take from them what they need, they'll push them to the limit, And here, the focus is more around if we all perform, then we all win. And we have a corporate investment together. So it's very much around the corporate aspect. Um, Social responsibility will exist, but obviously to a lesser degree with this type of organisation. So I think it's really important, and of course this presentation will be available to all of the scholars. But, you know, just maybe if you have a personal reflection when you do look back on the four worlds and think about, you know, where you see yourself now. Does any of the worlds resonate? And I'm sure there'll be some aspects that will resonate with you. And then where would you see yourself in 3, 5, and 10 years' time? Because obviously, as you grow, as you finish your studies, as you enter into the workforces, and you develop your own career, you are going to have a shift in your own, you know, way of working and what sort of type of organisation you would like to work in. I'm just going to take a pause here and call for any sharing of insights or any comments or questions. And Rana's going to let me know if there's anything in the chat, or if anybody would like to unmute themselves, they're most welcome. So I'm just going to throw to Rana. Rana, there's something in the chat. Yep.
Yes, from Abdullah Hamid. He's asking, he say, hello, thank you for this presentation. I would like to ask how entry-level applicant with little experience can land job. The little experience, a new joiner, how they can start the job or start the land job.
Okay, and that question is from Abdullah.
From Abdullah Hamid, yes.
Thank you, Abdullah, for a great question.
Is it okay if I?
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl. The point of my question is like right now in the Middle East, like the youth unemployment rate is standing at about 25%, and most of the entry-level jobs we look at are either nationalized or require 2 to 5 years of previous experience. So how can we as fresh graduates find our way around that and find a gap that we can enter the job market through?
Look, this is an excellent question, Abdul, and I think also it's been amplified by COVID in the past 12 months. If I could just take a step back, and if I use myself as an example. So obviously when I was going through university over 25 years ago and coming out as a, you know, working my way through university, about to enter the workforce, and entering, you know, and thinking, well, all I have is a degree. I don't have a lot of experience. My experience might have been from working in a cafe, maybe as a waitress, growing up in Australia, as opposed to maybe doing something that was perhaps a little bit more contributing towards a future career. Now, back then, there was a lot of graduate programs. Companies invested in that. That was the way to get a job. You know, you applied for a graduate program, or you entered at entry level and you made, you know, so to speak, to use an expression, you were right at the bottom and you made the tea and coffee. Not literally, but that was the type of level that you entered. Now, that has really shifted a lot. So if you bring us to now, and if I could give a piece of advice to all of you, not only are you learning in a different way, you're certainly a lot more tech savvy than many of us who've been in the workforce for several years. So the first thing to remember is that you bring a skill set that graduates of 10, 20, 30 years ago didn't bring to a workplace. So it's to focus on those skills that you've used going through your university time when you're developing, whether it's your thesis, the projects that you work on. You know, you would have done it through collaboration, through networks, through technology, analytical skills. These are skills that I know that university students have and use very well as they go through university. So focus on that skill set because they're in demand. The second part to this is that more and more students, particularly if you're fresh out of school, you've gone from school to university, so you haven't really had a lot of work experience, are actually looking for opportunities. So you could either look for volunteer opportunities through a social organisation or a charity organisation. You could sign up for remote opportunities. The United Nations does that, so you can actually work on putting together a white paper or a research paper. So there are definitely ways to get experience, albeit it might be voluntary or unpaid, but you could look at those types of opportunities. There's also a lot of internships, summer internships that companies do. They bring in students or students in their final year before they graduate. So there's some of those traditional ways as well. You may also offer yourself as a consultant or a freelancer. So the skills that you bring again are still sought after and would be very competitive because you could also look at a different and a lower price point while still offering quality work. So in some of the personal stuff that I do, I'm involved in various things outside of my day job. I actually engage students, whether they, particularly university students, and I engage their services. And, you know, it's a great experience for them. And it's also great for me because I'm able then not to pay top rate, which I can't afford if I perhaps go to a more experienced person. So if you're going brand new as an applicant, I would focus on the skills that you've developed from your studies, from university, from high school, the projects that you've worked on. I'm sure there are other things that you have done in your personal life that you can draw upon and the experiences that you have. And I would actually sell experiences and skills as opposed to I haven't worked previously in an organization. So, Abdul, does that help you with that question? If you'd like to
Uh,
unmute yourself.
yeah, thanks a lot for the answer. And do you think the impact of COVID would start decreasing soon? Like, will we start seeing changes? How will the market, the job market, look after that, like post-COVID?
Yeah, look, I'm seeing in the UAE, I've been doing some research around this and gathering intel. I think we're going to see a different jobs market, Abdul. I think, you know, that's a really great question. The market is not going to return the way it was before pre-COVID. We already started to see changes in the market pre-COVID, and I think that will continue. The shift definitely is going to be on technology, remote working, flexible working. It's going to be about engaging a more mobile workforce. So yes, we are going to see quite a lot of changes. I think the job market in some respects is actually picking up. We've seen quite a bit of movement in the market. Certainly not at the same levels pre-COVID, but at least it's promising to see that hiring is starting to happen again. So I think it's just really important. If I would say to you and to your fellow scholars, would be networking and collaboration is really important. So a little bit of the face-to-face networking has opened up again, not to the level that it was pre-COVID, but I would encourage you to join. There's lots of opportunities online, collaboration rooms and networks that are available. They're great ways not only to learn and talk to more experienced workers, but also an opportunity then to hear about those opportunities that are not necessarily advertised. So I would encourage definitely that online collaboration and networking. Okay. I'm happy. Maya has my details from Al Ghurair Foundation, and I'm happy. I do a lot of career counselling, a lot of coaching and mentoring, and I do that pro bono. So I'm more than happy if anyone has individual questions or needs some guidance to make myself available. So Abdul, I'd be more than happy to provide you with some further guidance if that's of use.
Thanks a lot, Cheryl. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Does anyone want to unmute and ask a question or run anything in the chat? Okay, so let's push on. I'm just a little bit conscious of time. So thank you for the great question. So, you know, we're really seeing, as I mentioned, a shift where organizations have to become that agile organization. Now, for many of you, you may not have seen on the left, this is like a traditional structure, that real hierarchical, traditional way of structuring an organization, departments, functions, managers, and so forth. Okay, what we're going to see is not an organization, but an organism. Okay, and that's what the picture on the right looks like. We're going to see these clusters within a larger organism or ecosystem. It's going to be built around teams. It's going to be built around flexibility, being dynamic, adapting quickly, quick decision making, leadership that can act quickly and show the direction, enabling people. It's not about hierarchies. It's not about managers and workers. It's more about we work together. So going back to business models, they're going to have to change their business model. And this is where we're probably going to see the traditional middle management being taken out, and that will become more a collaborative networking cluster approach where we work together. So lean management is going to be the thing with the clusters. It's going to be about agility. There'll be a core group of people, which will be considered the core management, but then there'll be a lot of satellite clusters around working on different projects or tasks or initiatives and so forth. Okay, so what we're going to see is a self-directed, self-empowered, self-management system where accountability is held within each of those teams. Okay. So the term tribe will be used more and more within the workplace. If we have a look here, and again, just to pick a few industries, what we're seeing on the vertical axis is the ability of an organization to increase its agility. Okay. And then on the horizontal axis, the need for a more adaptable workforce. Now, this research was done by McKinsey, by their Global Institute, and it was done in 2018. So it's quite recent. Obviously, it's pre-COVID, and I'm sure if they, their new report might show some shifts in this. But if we just have a look at this, definitely what we're going to see is around the sectors of energy, mining, oil and gas, manufacturing, banking, financial services, and retail, a need for high increases on both agility and having an adaptable workforce. Okay. If we have a look more at the education sector and the government, I think definitely there's going to be a degree of agility and an adaptable workforce, but to a lesser degree. I think where the big changes will come in with education particularly will be more around technology and how education is delivered. Now, we've seen with COVID that there has to be online learning, remote learning. Teachers have had to quickly learn a new way of education. I know that working at RAC Academy, we have 5 schools. We had at one time during lockdown last year, 100% online learning. It then shifted to a blended learning, some face-to-face, some online. Obviously, you're trying to manage people that might need to be learning remotely because of COVID, and those that are able to come into face-to-face learning. So I think we're going to see that continue into the future. Healthcare